the battlefield is changing dramatically. The General Staff reports that Russian losses in this sector have been catastrophic, averaging over 1,000 casualties a day. If Huliaipole falls, then it could open the highway to Zaporizhzhia city. A new revolution is happening beneath the radar. The rise and saturation of iron infantry. While Putin rejects any compromise on his maximalist demands for Ukrainian land, a massive, deadly shift is happening on the battlefield. I'm Philip Ingram, and this is Battle Plans Exposed. For the first time, Ukraine has inflicted 35,000 killed or wounded Russian soldiers in 1 month. Mikhailo Fedorov, the new Minister of Defense of Ukraine, isn't satisfied with that figure, however. He wants to achieve 50,000 casualties per month. And remember, Russia lost only 15,000 troops over 9 years in Afghanistan. This brutal strategic goal from the Ukrainians isn't a PR soundbite. It's calculated and a calculated objective, and it's very much within Ukraine's grasp. New autonomous weapon systems are appearing on the front line, and they're changing the nature of the war. Not just in Ukraine, but changing the nature of warfare globally. But before we examine the indicators and warnings of the war, let's take a look at the footage from the ever-expanding front lines of this war. So in this first clip, we see Russian desperation, new Russian camouflage, or is it a fancy dress costume trying to look like a penguin? It's not very effective as a camouflage, and not very effective on the battlefield. So in this second clip, we have a suicidal Russian frontal assault in a stripped-down Ural truck. No armour on it whatsoever, the troops out in the open, fully visible to Ukrainian reconnaissance drones, and then, of course, to Ukrainian attack drones. It does not end well for the Russians. We see the truck hits a possible anti-personnel mine beforehand because there's a puff of smoke, and it's got a box just over where the driver is. That's probably some form of anti-drone capability. Whether it actually works or not is a different matter. It doesn't work in this case. And despite all of the soldiers on the truck wearing their winter camouflage outfits, they get taken out by the Ukrainian drone. Of course, the truck has got no winter camouflage on it whatsoever. So in this third clip, we have France releasing footage of their interception of the oil tanker Grinch in the Mediterranean Sea. The Grinch is part of Vladimir Putin's shadow fleet, and this is the first time that we've seen European nations getting involved. Of course, the British were assisting the French with monitoring the ship as it went through the Straits of Gibraltar. And this sort of activity will begin to hurt Putin's shadow war if the volume is increased dramatically. Putin will be getting worried if his grey fleet is being intercepted, not just by the Americans, but now by the Europeans. Let's see if the political will exists within other countries to do the same. So here we've got some of the developing tactics with drone-on-drone wars. This is near the village of Huliaipole during a reconnaissance mission by the Ukrainians, and it spots an enemy Russian Baba Yaga drone, and through coordinated communications, the reconnaissance drone brings in another drone that crashes into it, knocking it out of the sky. Drone-on-drone warfare, as it is, to deadly effect. And in our final clip, we have the Ukrainians using a ground-based drone with an armoured capsule on it. Now, this isn't taking weapons into the front line. It's been used to evacuate casualties from the front line, taking the casualties back to an area where they can be transferred into normal wheeled ambulances to seek immediate medical attention without putting the medics at risk by going right up to the front line. And here we see the casualty having been loaded into the capsule, and then the drone sets off back to meet the medics. As the grey zone expands and as the battlefield actually is measured over tens of kilometres, this is a critical tool to save valuable medical staff. And of course, we see the medical staff going off in their armoured ambulances with electronic warfare and anti-drone antenna on top of it. First, let's take a look at the Zaporizhzhia Oblast. Now, the Zaporizhzhia Oblast is to the southwest of the Donetsk Oblast, which we've been focusing on in recent weeks and months. That's where Pokrovsk is, that's where Lyshansk is, and that's where the majority of the fighting has been concentrated. However, this area is now seeing much more action. And again, the Zaporizhzhia Oblast is not fully owned or captured by Russian troops. The Ukrainians still control a significant part of it. So let's take a look at this area and remember Zaporizhzhia. So here we have Zaporizhzhia, and over the past few weeks, Huliaipole, which is just here, just under the Z of Zalnechny, has emerged alongside Pokrovsk as one of the hottest sectors on this entire 1,200 kilometre front. We're seeing upwards of 30 Russian assaults every 24 hours. Putin's forces are no longer just shelling the town, they're inside it. Official reports from Huliaipole military administration confirm that small Russian infantry groups are infiltrating the town from multiple directions. We're now seeing brutal house-to-house, street-to-street fighting. A fighter from Ukraine's 225th Morocco Battalion single-handedly took out 3 Russian troops in close combat near Huliaipole, and after a drone strike hit their hideout, surviving Russians tried to escape. Ukrainian forces tracked them and in real time took them out. A Russian assault group of 7 was also captured by Ukrainian troops near Huliaipole. And the signals and indicators here point to a larger Russian strategy. If Huliaipole falls, then it could open the highway to Zaporizhzhia city, and that threatens to outflank the whole defensive line in the south. The strategic risk is potential encirclement of logistic routes to Zaporizhzhia city, but Ukraine is making them pay for every metre, as they've done in Pokrovsk. The General Staff reports that Russian losses in this sector have been catastrophic, averaging over 1,000 casualties a day across the wider Zaporizhzhia axis. Ukraine's 102nd and 106th Territorial Defence Brigades are holding the line, but they're under immense pressure from Russian glide bombs and a relentless meat wave of infantry from the Russians. Huliaipole is no longer a quiet sector. It is the anvil upon which the future of the southern front is being hammered. However, like in Pokrovsk, drone warfare dominates, and as we get claims and counterclaims of territory won and lost, these claims are not aimed at being necessarily factual, but focused on influencing their chains of command, that they're having more success than they are, and trying to have a psychological impact on their adversaries. The Russians are trying to scare the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are telling the truth and trying to scare the Russians back. Russian middle bloggers continue to highlight the inconsistency between the Russian military command's claims of advances and the reality on the battlefield. Particularly as we've seen in the Kupiansk direction, back up in the Donetsk Oblast. Thanks to drone surveillance, any Russian assaults are easily spotted and neutralised long before they can have an impact on the front line. Coupled with this, Ukraine targets large ammo dumps in enemy territory right as Russia begins their attacks, completely cutting off any way of applying sustained pressure for assaults or further assaults, or any ability to follow through if there's any success. So as the front lines seem to be showing little signs of movement, is there something more than the winter weather that is driving this trend? As the UAV drone war in the skies develops and changes tactics, so the impact of drone technologies elsewhere is having a growing impact. The maritime environment has allowed Ukraine with no navy to dominate the Black Sea, neutralising the large Russian Black Sea fleet, destroying up to 35% of this fleet, forcing Putin's warships into hiding far from Ukraine in ports in Russian territory. But as the air and sea war evolves, a new revolution is happening beneath the radar. We're now seeing the arrival of the Iron Infantry, the rise and saturation of unmanned ground vehicles on the battlefield. We have reports of Ukrainian land-based drones with heavy machine guns dominating and holding ground, something the military classicist will say only the infantry can do. Robots as infantry. On the Zaporizhzhia front, a Ukrainian robot captured a group of Russian soldiers. The incident involved a droid TW-7.62, a remotely operated unmanned ground vehicle. The mission was conducted entirely without human soldiers, apart from those controlling the unmanned ground vehicle. The system is equipped with artificial intelligence elements that enables the robot to detect and track targets. It is the first time in history Russian troops have surrendered to Ukrainian unmanned ground vehicle. Recent reports from the Konstantinivka front describe a single Ukrainian land drone armed with a heavy machine gun holding a frontline position solo for nearly 6 weeks. It didn't need sleep, it didn't need rations, it just needed to be reloaded every 48 hours. As the unit commanders say, robots do not bleed. But it's not just about firepower, it's about technical sabotage. The Alter Ego Battalion recently deployed robotic units specifically to hunt a new Russian threat, and that's fiber optic drones. By physically severing the glowing cables that guide these unjammable Russian FPVs, these ground robots are blinding the enemy before they can strike. They're removing the control mechanism as well. In a remarkable display of multi-role capability, one of these robots, after neutralizing its targets, located 2 severely wounded Ukrainian soldiers in the grey zone and relayed their exact coordinates for a successful Medevac. This isn't going unnoticed. The Chinese PLA are taking these lessons to the next level. They're not just building drones, they're building autonomous combat architectures. We're seeing mothership ground platforms designed to support the close battle with integrated sensors, anti-tank missiles, and even localized anti-air shields. But this hardware is being driven by perhaps the most radical shift in modern history. Ukraine hasn't just mechanized this war, it's gamified it. It's called the Army of Drones Bonus, a Call of Duty style point system that has transformed the battlefield into a high-stakes competition. For the 400 units currently logged in, the incentive is simple. More confirmed kills equals more points, and more points means better gear. Remember the new Ukrainian Defense Minister Fedorov, who I mentioned at the start of this show. This is his brainchild. While working as Ukraine's Minister of Digital Transformation, he came up with the idea. Just look at the 59th Brigade. They recently pulled off a feat military textbook writers thought was impossible by downing a multi-million-dollar Russian Mi-8 helicopter using a small FPV drone costing just a few £100. In the military's new digital marketplace, that single strike was worth a cool 100 points. You get 120 points for capturing a prisoner of war, 12 for eliminating a soldier, or 25 for a drone operator. Destroying an enemy multiple launch rocket system earns up to 50 points. And of course, 20 points for damaging a tank, or double to 40 if it's completely destroyed. This isn't just about medals or morale. It's a decentralized supply chain. Units take their E-points to the Brave One market, effectively an Amazon for war, where they can buy the latest thermal optics, faster interceptors, or ground robots directly from the manufacturers. It is pragmatic, it is lethal, and it is brutally efficient. The takeaway for 2026 is clear. The kill zone has expanded. Whether you're a sailor or an infantryman in a trench, the machine is no longer just watching you, it's coming for you. So let's have a closer look at the tech. So let's look at the photographs. The first 2 photographs are amazing. These are from near the village of Lyman. And the little white streaks, it took me a moment or two before I worked out what they are. They're the fiber optic cables. Fiber optic cables being lit up in the dark, and the fiber optic cables, if you look at this closely during the day, covering everything. That shows the level of control that are with the different drones from the air that's coming in. And it shows the level of surveillance that there is. So if you're infantry, you need to be worried, but also the number of weapon systems that are backing up that surveillance and can carry out attacks. The battlefield is changing dramatically, and not just visually dramatically, but for the soldiers that are there. And other changes that we're seeing are the unmanned ground vehicles. We have mine clearance vehicles of various different types. We have the logistic carrying vehicles. You can put your resupplies in the cages that are here and drive them forward to the front line. We have unmanned ground vehicles with heavy machine guns, with tracks, with wheels, and we see here being controlled by a Ukrainian operator. We have robot dogs, and robot dogs can carry out surveillance into complex areas. They can bring different weapon systems into complex areas. And then the Ukrainians are developing robot trucks. No personnel involved in it whatsoever, heavy weapons on the back, moving more and more forward. The ability to do that is becoming the new technology that not just the Ukrainians are developing, but we look at the Americans, and they've got the unmanned helicopter, the unmanned transport helicopter, able to move capabilities forward from within inside the chassis of the helicopter. And of course, our own British Royal Navy are developing their own autonomous capability to support surface vessels and our aircraft carriers with autonomous drones that they can fly from them. One of the things we have to recognise with this development technology, and we think of it as new technology. We saw unmanned vehicles being used by British Army in Northern Ireland. We had unmanned earth-moving vehicles clearing barriers where there could have been booby-trap bombs in them. We have seen unmanned vehicles being used for mine clearance beforehand. But what the Ukraine war is doing is it's giving a testing ground for a rapid development of technology and it being tested under combat conditions. This is something that is unique and something that is being exploited. But given all of the developments that we're seeing here and all of the technologies, this is just adding to the complex of the modern battlefield. We're still seeing around Pokrovsk, around Lyman, around Zaporizhzhia and elsewhere, guttural trench warfare going on. We're seeing where soldiers are getting engaged and either having to use their personal weapons to fire at the enemy, or in some cases, as we've seen the British use in the Falklands War, in the Gulf, it's bayonets. And that level of guttural warfare still occurs no matter what technologies are being developed. They just add to the complexity of what's coming in the future. So in a couple of ways, this is a disaster for Russia, because if they continue their meat waves, just throwing personnel forward, the Ukrainians can sit back and destroy them, either with unmanned ground vehicles, as we've seen them holding ground, or the success of the drones, exemplified by the fibre optic cables that are there. But the other thing that is hurting the Russians as well is the cost of development. And this is how the Allies effectively won the Cold War against the old Soviet Union. We bankrupted them. It cost them even more to build the technologies that equaled the technologies that were coming out of the West. And this is why Western advances and Western support for Ukraine here is vital, because it costs Russia an awful lot more to try and copy and develop similar technologies. That is hurting them financially, just at a time when Ukraine is hurting them financially by imposing their own sanctions in destroying their oil and gas infrastructure, their ability to pay for this war. That's all for today's Battle Plans Exposed. If you want to stay ahead of the curve on global security, make sure you subscribe to the Sun's YouTube channel and hit the notification bell that there is below. I'm particularly interested in your thoughts on the gamification of the front lines. Does the army of drones point system go too far? Or is it simply the future of efficient warfare? Let me know in the comments below. And thank you for watching today. Goodbye.